Thank you very much, and it is a great pleasure to be here. And the reason why it is because I think this is a rather important conference on an important topic for us all. What I want to do is just spend a couple of minutes on the overall national challenge of exporting, and then I want to talk a little bit about how the east of England is doing in relation to particularly the US, and something about why the US is a particularly intriguing opportunity, and therefore why it's so good to see so many people here. And I start with the overall economic and financial background to this. In a sense, you don't need me to tell you what it is. We're coming out of an economic and financial crisis that's been around for 4 years now. We're back from the brink, but nevertheless a lot of real difficulty, and in particular as far as the British economy is concerned, we know we've got a very substantial rebalancing job to do for an economy that in the run-up to the crisis became overly dependent on government spending fueled by debt for one thing, and consumer spending also fueled by debt for another. In fact, Britain got itself in the unenviable position by about 2008, where the amount of debt per head in the consumer market was the highest of any of the G8 countries. Not a good position to be in. Things have been getting better lately, and the consumer debt per head has been coming down, and we all know that the government has embarked on a fiscal consolidation program to deal with the government's debt, and we have to find new sources of growth. We have to find a new growth model, because that old machine where the domestic consumer was driving demand isn't going to drive it going forwards. And the economics textbooks tell you that if it isn't the domestic consumer and it isn't the government, then the only other sources of demand that there are to drive growth are, one, investment, which I'm not going to talk about a great deal today, though it is important, clearly, and two, trade, engagement with the international markets. That's our national challenge. And we come at it with a history extending back over 40 to 50 years, actually, of a relatively weak trading position in this economy, compared with some of our obvious European partners. For most of the last 40 to 50 years, this is not a new problem, our economy has run a trade deficit, and trade has been a drag on growth instead of a contributor to growth. It's that we have over the next few years got to turn round if we want stable, sustainable economic growth in this country. And we're a bit behind the curve in another sense too. If I compare us with our European counterparts, a smaller proportion of British companies export than is the case on the average through Europe. So one way of looking at our challenge is to encourage more British firms to get into the international markets so that we get up to that European average. That would take us from about 20% of companies to about 25% of companies, or in very round terms translates into the target that the Prime Minister set about a year ago of 100,000 new companies into the export markets over the next few years. Seems like a big number for sure, and it's not a trivial challenge without doubt. But that's what I think is the national challenge. It is a substantial challenge that we all face, and we will continue to face over a number of years. One of the things I find myself saying to ministerial colleagues and anybody who'll care to listen is that this is not a sprint. We won't. It's not a sprint. There's no magic wand to wave, if I can mix the metaphors. Actually, we have to stick at this for quite a long period of time. As I said, we've actually laboured under a weak trade position for something like 40 to 50 years, or to put it, at least all of the working lives of us here present. So this is an important task for us all. And then when I look at where we export, we major a lot on the importance of the emerging markets in the years to come. The growth of China, the growth of India, the growth of Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, Africa. 6 out of the 10 fastest growing countries in the world are African at the moment. But we also need to remember that our existing export markets in the mature markets, both across the Channel and across the Atlantic, constitute something like 70 or 75% of our exports, and there are immense opportunities also in those markets. Across the Channel, it's likely to be relatively slow growing for all the reasons that we understand for a while yet. In North America, I think the story is rather stronger. US growth is weak by its own standards, but nonetheless is quite robust by European standards. And Canada's doing rather nicely too, and so is Mexico, by the way, both, of course, members of NAFTA, so that when you think of exporting to the US or basing business in the US, there is also markets, sizable markets to the north and the south, as well as the very large market in the US itself. Now, when I look at the east of England, this is a vibrant economy. And indeed, the east of England's export performance is pretty strong. It's stronger than the national average, 20% up in the year 2011 versus a 10% national average. And year to date, or a 12-month period up to the end of September of this year, 18% growth in exports to the US versus a 7% growth for the UK as a whole. So people from this region start with a strong position when we look at the US. But it's important, nonetheless, to recognise that I think there are massive opportunities, and although the performance is already strong, I believe it can be even stronger. Now, why is the US important? In a sense, you know the answers as well as I do. This is the world's largest economy. Even though China is forecast to overtake the US in absolute size sometime in the next 20 years or so, the fact is that the US is not only the largest, one of the most wealthy, it is clearly the world's most dynamic and flexible, rapidly developing, in the sense of rapidly changing, always adjusting economy. Never short America for too long, as one of my friends once said to me. Even at the height of the difficulties a couple of 3 years back. It's a huge market. It's a market also where the UK brand is very highly valued. I think it's a market where Britishness is extremely strongly valued, more so than we realise. It's true this year more than ever, this point. The UK brand, what with a royal wedding, a diamond jubilee, the Olympics, has got stronger than ever. I find this on my travels wherever I go, whether it's in North America, whether it's in Asia or South America, wherever I go, the UK brand has never been stronger than it is now. And it's not just a brand that's born of successful royal events and a highly successful Olympics. It's also a brand born of a recognition that what the British economy has to offer in terms of products and services is leading edge, it's high tech, it's very varied, it's quality product, and it has a strong resonance with the demand by middle-class audiences in so many countries in the world, including in the rising emerging markets, but very importantly also in the US. I think we consistently underestimate just how strong the British brand is around the world. And what's true around the world is true in spades in the US. But the US is a big, complex economy. It's a big, complex country. And I think as we look at the US, as we contemplate getting into business in the US, we have one big advantage, that brand that I've just mentioned, and we have some risks that come from, how can I put it? It's a country we think we know better than we probably do. Churchill famously put it, two people separated by a common language. I wouldn't put it in quite those terms. But what is undoubtedly true is that America is a very complex society, a very complex economy. It's very varied. In some senses, it isn't one economy. It's 50 different economies. It's certainly 50 different regulatory environments for many purposes of doing business. And in so many ways, it's an economy where if we don't do our planning carefully, we will fall into the trap of trying to build up a business on the basis that we think we know it better than we actually do. Choosing partners, choosing contacts in order to build business in America is clearly critical. It's critical in any country in the world, of course, but I think it's a note that I want to sound because it's perhaps particularly true in America, not least because we tend to overlook it because we do indeed, more or less, speak the same language. So the message then is very simple. I think, one, we have a national challenge. We need to grow exports, and that's a collective challenge for us all. Two, the US is the world's largest market and a very dynamic, changing, entrepreneurial, interesting market where there's lots of things we can do. Three, the UK brand stands very highly in the US. And four, we need to do some careful business planning as we get into it. And that's what UK Trade and Investment is here to help for. UKTI has offices around this country and of course is present in this region through Liz and her team. It's here to help companies get into the export markets either for the very first time or to spread wings if a company is already in one market and wants to contemplate moving into another one. And it's here to help in a variety of different ways, whether it's providing that advice to a company exporting for the very first time through its passport to export programs, whether it's attendance at trade fairs, whether it's participation in missions to different sectors in different economies around the world, and including, of course, the US. All of those respects, it exists and is funded by the UK taxpayer in order to provide support to British companies seeking to build their business overseas. So do make use of their services as you think about getting into export markets in general and the US in particular. They have teams around the US so that Liz can connect up with colleagues in New York and in Los Angeles and Chicago and in Houston and elsewhere. And they're there to serve. They're there to help. I'm pleased to report that in the autumn statement of last week, George Osborne allocated more money to UKTI so that it can build up its services, and in particular extra money to help smaller businesses, reducing the cost of market introduction services, increasing the amount of money available to attend trade fairs and so forth. We will do our best to make good use of that extra money that's been allocated. I'm very conscious that extra money has been allocated in an overall context of difficult times where the government is in overall terms seeking to consolidate spending. That underscores the importance that we attach to rising to this national challenge of exporting more. UK Export Finance is also there to help with new products, the ability to fund for the first time, ability to fund and not just guarantee. And so again, this may or may not be relevant particularly in the US, but in general, think about UKEF, and if you're unsure how they can help in building the business overseas, again, use UK Trade and Investment as the point of contact into those government support services. So that's really my message. There's an exciting opportunity in the US. The East of England has already demonstrated a rapid growth in accessing the markets in the US. There's a lot more to go because our market share of the US is not as big as all that overall. We could do a lot better than we are doing. And frankly, the opportunities are potentially limitless. And just to make one other point again that I mentioned a little earlier, remember that the US is not just a big market in its own right, it's also part of NAFTA and therefore has free trade with Canada and with Mexico, two very strong economies and very different sorts of economies, of course, just to the north and just to the south of it. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.